I'm talking to um, an inventor again, and this time it's the inventor of the mobile phone, Marty Cooper. Hello, Marty. Nice to meet you.
Hi there, Joerg. Nice to meet you as well.
Thank you. Well, so thanks for taking the time to answer the questions that I will ask you. Um, so, first of all, tell us a bit about how you actually got the idea of making a mobile phone. Because I heard from other places that you actually are a Star Trek fan, and this is the reason why you came up with the mobile phone. Is that correct?
Well, not really, Joerg. That, uh, that myth was started when they made a movie called How William Shatner Changed the World, and they came over to my house, and I got so wrapped up in the glamour of making a movie that I let them get away with starting that rumor. But the reality is that I was working for Motorola for many, many years, for 29 years. And there we had always the dream that real communications, personal communications, had to be with a handheld device. So if I really got that idea from somebody else, maybe it was from Dick Tracy, who many, many years before that had a wrist radio. Is Dick Tracy a familiar thing to you in Germany?
Yes, I've heard about him. Yes.
Yeah. Well, Dick Tracy had a wrist uh, two-way radio. And so when I was at Motorola, we were making two-way radios. So finally, after many years, we finally had the technology to make a wrist two-way radio. And at that point, Dick Tracy had a wrist two-way video. So he was always ahead of us.
And that was in the early 70s.
Well, Dick Tracy was even way, way before that. But in the early 70s, we got the information that AT&T was the largest company in the world. And at that time, in each country, even in Germany, there was Deutsche Telekom. In the U.S., we had AT&T, but AT&T was the biggest company in the world. It was a monopoly. If you wanted to have a telephone, the only way to get a telephone was to rent it from AT&T. And they invented a thing they called cellular telephony. And this, they said, was going to set people free. They were going to have communications without wires. Unfortunately, the way they understood it, you would have to be in your car. We had been trapped in our homes. We had been tied to our desks with this wire for over 100 years, and now AT&T wants to trap us in our cars. And we thought that was just wrong, that the time was ready in 1973 for personal communications with complete freedom, the freedom to be anywhere and to have your own communication device. And that is what gave me the idea of, if we were going to battle this small company in Chicago, Motorola, if we were going to battle the biggest company in the world, we had to do something really dazzling. And that's when I had the idea, why don't we build a real portable telephone?
And the first reaction was, Marty, you are crazy. This is not going to work.
Well, at Motorola, of course, many people shared my dream. When we talked to people outside of Motorola, they said, "Oh, there's no market." I had a fellow from London came to visit me even in 1981, and he said, maybe in London we will have 12,000 customers. That's our marketing prediction. Well, you know that today there are 10 million customers in London. So the world did not immediately embrace this idea.
And what was their reason to predict that it won't be such a big success?
Well, people are conservative. If you think about it, Björn, even when we introduced the first mobile phone, you call it a handy phone, right?
Yes, a handy. Yeah.
We introduced the handy in 1983, but it took at least 10 years for this to become really popular. It turns out that people are very conservative, and new ideas usually take time.
Yes, well, I did a video interview with Chuck Peddle, who was engineering the first affordable computer chips back then, and he said when he was coming up with the PAD computer in 1977, especially teachers were telling that computers are replacing their jobs. They are not needed anymore. So I guess this is like a parallel to what you are explaining, that people are afraid of new things and they are afraid of the world changing so much that they would lose what they have at the moment.
Yes, I'm afraid that you're right. People are conservative. Technology is almost always ahead of what people will embrace.
So, what was your starting point and how did you start design it? I mean, as we know, it started out to be in the end like a prick or something. I think you even called it a prick.
Yes, the very first thing that I did is I called our industrial designers. So we would have an idea of what the outside of this phone would look like. And I talked to the head of industrial design, a fellow named Rudy Krolop, and I said, Rudy, we are going to build a handheld portable telephone. And he said to me, what is a handheld portable telephone? And of course, I explained it to him, and he stopped all work that he was doing from everybody else in the company. Of course, he continued to charge them for his time, but he assigned this job to all of his people, and we had a contest who could build the best handheld phone, the best handy. And I bought these people dinner, and each man presented his design to me, and they were beautiful, Joerg. They were examples of what phones are today. One was a sliding phone, another was a flip phone, but the phone that I selected was a small phone, looked like a little bit like a shoe, but it was very simple. And it was very small. It was only about this big. We took that phone now to the engineers who had to put the parts in it. And remember now that this is 1973, there were no integrated circuits. So this phone had to be built with individual components, capacitors, inductors, and transistors. And so the phone grew and grew and grew. And by the time they finished, the phone, which ended up looking like a brick now, weighed over a kilo, and it was huge. The battery alone was almost a half a kilo. So the phone started out very small, but it grew.
I see, I see. So this was because there was no integration back then.
That's exactly right.
All right.
And
So,
and the
yeah.
components used a great deal of current, so we needed a huge battery as well.
I remember you said once in an interview it was about 20 minutes speaking time.
That's right. Even with this huge battery, you could only talk for 20 minutes, but Jörg, that was not a problem because you try to hold a kilogram up in your hand for 20 minutes, you could never do it. So it was not a problem.
That heavy it was, 1 kilogram.
Yes, over that. Yes,
So like a small parcel.
yes.
I see, I see. And how about the technology? I mean, you had to come up with the concept of having cellular antennas, and you would have to be mobile, and well, you would have to be able to move. but also not lose the reception between the stations. I guess this was kind of groundbreaking, and probably very complex to think about.
Yes, well, you're exactly right. First of all, for the phone itself, we had been working on various parts of this because Motorola was a leader in two-way radios. We were making two-way radios for police departments, and for industrial companies. So you're exactly right. We needed a special antenna. We needed a thing called a radio synthesizer so that we could now operate on many hundreds of channels, not just one or two, which was the history at that time. But all of these things I had working in our laboratories. We needed those things. We knew that we were going to need them, and we had been working on them for years. So the challenge was to put all of those together in a small package. But then you're exactly right. In order to make this work, we had to have a cell site, a station. And so in order to do the demonstration that we had planned, we not only had to build the handheld device, we had to build the stations that went with it. And all of that was done in 90 days.
Just 90 days.
That's exactly right, because that's all the time we had. We were afraid at that moment, at the end of 1972, we heard rumors that our government agency, the FCC, was going to make a decision, and we were afraid they would make the wrong decision, that they would give AT&T a monopoly to build car telephones, automobile telephones. So we decided that in 90 days we would do a demonstration in Washington, D.C., and try to persuade our government to not do that, to have competition and to have handheld phones.
So you mentioned you had to support a lot of frequencies. So you actually didn't come up with a couple of frequencies idea, but you said you would, well, also use other antennas, kind of antennas and other frequencies that were already available at that time? Or what was your idea?
Well, the FCC, this is our Federal Communications Commission, actually said that they were going to make a large number of channels available. They actually took channels away from the TV stations because the TV stations were not using these channels very effectively. And so they announced that they were going to take these channels away from the TV stations and make them useful for cellular telephony. And so our challenge was to make sure that this was a competitive business, not an AT&T monopoly, and also to make sure that the system would accommodate handheld phones and not just car phones. So yes, in contrast with phones up to that time, car phones had only maybe one or two, sometimes up to 10 channels, but now we were going to have 666 channels.
Wow.
A huge number of channels. And of course, today there are actually thousands of channels now available. But this was a big step forward, and in order to do that, we needed some very special technology.
Great. So, why did it actually took 10 years? I heard it was because of the FCC not wanting to regulate it and approve it.
Well, that we always blame the FCC for everything, but the bottom line is, to make one unit like that, to make one telephone, was a huge achievement, but it was not ready for prime time. There was no way that we could produce that phone in large quantities, and so it took a number of years for us to create the useful technology that would allow us to reproduce the phones. We also had to continue the battle with AT&T because they continued to believe that car telephones were the right way to go, And so we continually argued with them about the exact specifications. And then when we were ready to go around 1980, the FCC then had to decide who were going to be the providers. Well, that was a very difficult problem, but I must say that we could not blame only the FCC. We were to blame, the AT&T was to blame. There was just a lot of work that had to be done during that 10-year period.
I see. Though there are a lot of rumors about this history of the mobile phone, even in the videos where your invention was mentioned. So it's good that we actually can get some clarification here. Um, so you said you created the phone, and how did you actually create your first radio station for the mobile phone? Did you have a big antenna in your office or something? How did it first start?
Well, the important thing is that we have to demonstrate this in a public forum
On the outside.
on the outside, because remember, we were trying to convince our FCC, and the FCC is a part of government, and they work for our Congress. So we really had to convince a lot of people. And so our idea was that we would go first to New York, because that's where we could get the most publicity. And we actually, in New York, built 2 cell sites. One in a building called the Alliance Building. Actually, then it was the Burlington Building. Today it's the Alliance Building. And we, on the top of that building, we put an antenna and a station. And then in the another part of Manhattan in New York, we put another, so that we would have an actual cellular system. In order to be cellular, we needed at least 2 cell sites, right?
Right.
So that's when we decided to have a press conference. And before the press conference, I wanted to make sure the radio was working right. So I went onto the street with a reporter, and that's when I made what is famously known as the first mobile telephone call.
Tell us a bit about that. I think I remember you called competitor. Exactly.
I don't know why I had that crazy idea, but as we were walking down the street, I was getting ready to demonstrate this phone, and I decided that I was call Dr. Joel Engel, who was managing the AT&T program. And amazingly, he answered the phone himself, not his secretary, but he did. And I said, Joel, I'm calling you from a cell phone, but a real cell phone, personal, portable, handheld cell phone. So you notice I was not afraid to rub it in, and there was silence on the other end of the line. And finally, he was politely responded. And to this day, Joel Engel does not remember that phone call, and I really can't blame him.
Oh yes, it must be a very shocking moment if you realize that your competitor made it first, I guess. And well, you probably wouldn't have thought that he actually made it possible.
Well, I am not his most popular person.
That's true. Yeah, yeah, I see. Um, so if you look at this, the development nowadays about the mobile phone, and that, well, everybody nowadays basically has one. Did you ever imagine that it would spread so far and become so famous, like an everyday thing?
Oh, we were certain. We really, personal communications was like a religion to us. We had observed how people used these phones when they became available as two-way radios. And we found that there were many businesses, even in 1973, that could not operate without personal handheld phones. And for example, the airlines, if you went to a airport in 1973, you would see all of the agents would be walking around with a handheld phone in their hands. so that it was ready. So we knew this was going to become widespread in use. And in fact, we told a joke then that someday when you were born, you would be assigned a phone number. Answer the phone, you had died. So we were convinced that everybody would have a handheld phone someday.
Interesting. And but I also heard that you stated you are not very happy with the smartphone development for some reason.
Well, I think smartphones are amazing technology. And of course, you have to admit that. You're a techie yourself, right?
Yes.
You're, imagine having in the palm of your hand a billion transistors. That's amazing. But technology is not amazing technical achievement. Good technology is measured by how people's lives are improved. And if you think about the smartphone, there are many conveniences, but the smartphone doesn't do anything in an optimal way. It's really not a very good telephone. It's awkward. The shape is not right. It fits against the side of your head. And it's not very good for reading email because you've got a tiny screen. And there are many, many things that it does, but none of them are optimal. And I think the future of smartphones, and of course it's crazy to call it a phone anymore, but the future of these smart personal devices is going to be much more profound and much more useful than it is today. I see the future cell phone, first of all, as being a device that is an optimal phone. How would you have an optimal phone? Well, I think you might have a device implanted behind your ear, powered by your body, and with a powerful computer in it to whom you could speak. And you would say, I want to talk to Joerg in Mannheim. And immediately I am connected with you. And to me, that is an optimum phone. But this device will also do many other things. It will measure various parameters on your body and be on the lookout for things that might be the beginning of a disease. And if in fact you could do that, if you could anticipate a disease in your body, there is the potential to inform a computer about what's going on. The computer will tell you to take a pill or to take some action. There is the possibility that we could stop disease completely by the use of cell phones. And there are many, many other things that you can do. We are using cell phones to measure people's fitness. We will use cell phones or some version of it, some features to educate people. Because today people play games on their portable devices, and the games are very challenging. But could you imagine if you design an education program that is equally challenging, that is tailored to an individual? We want to treat people as individuals and not as statistics. And if you do that, you can educate people and challenge every person to his ultimate capability. And that will cause a revolution itself. So we could have a revolution in medicine. We have a revolution in education. But the most important thing is going to be collaboration. The ability for people to think together as teams, to gather together people who are the optimum people to solve a problem or to make a decision, and have those people work together using all kinds of different collaboration techniques. Today we play games with these techniques. We call the games Twitter, we call Facebook, LinkedIn, but when you put all these capabilities together and you optimize an education system, I think we will have a revolution in education. And having done that, we will also have a revolution in our ability to solve problems. People will become more productive, and we will make a head start now on solving what is the biggest problem in the world. What do you think the biggest problem in the world is today?
I guess war and not enough food.
I think you're very close. It is poverty. It is the
Yes.
difference between the haves and the have nots. And as you know, there are only two ways to solve the problem. One is we can take all of the goods that we have and redivide them, redistribute them. Of course, if we do that, then everybody will be poor. That's not a solution. The only way to solve that problem is for us to be more productive, to produce more things. And if we produce more things, then when we divide them up, we can have a case where there are no have-nots, where there is enough for everybody.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because I'm actually a tester in the telemedicine company, and actually this medical revolution was one of my questions on my list because I also saw you held a speech about it in an interview last year. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I thought like, wow, this is really amazing. If this is the future for the in the next 10 years, then we don't have to worry about illnesses anymore. Um, but as you said, people are also very careful about new things. Don't you think that some people maybe don't want to know if they have a disease or when they are going to have a health problem or maybe when they are going to die or something? Don't you think that some people fear also the ability of having instant health information?
Well, you're right. That is a problem, but look at it from this viewpoint. You start out with a simple statement that sounds revolutionary to me, and that is that every disease is actionably preventable. What does that mean? Well, if you think about what the human body is like today, our bodies are a mess. We are loaded with all kinds of viruses, bacteria, toxins, all these terrible things that are in every one of our bodies, but our immune system handles these things. It keeps all these things suppressed and in control. Now, what happens if the immune system fails in some way? We call that disease. Well, if we can measure the human body, and especially if we know what you are susceptible to, how do we know that? Well, we measure your genome. And we know that maybe he doesn't know it, but he has a susceptibility to congestive heart failure. Well, then you wear a sensor, and the sensor just sits there, doesn't do anything other than measure you, but it knows when you start accumulating fluids in your chest. That is the beginning of congested heart failure. Well, before this even becomes a problem, a computer will analyze the results and come back and tell you, take a pill or go to see a doctor, and you stop this disease before it becomes a disease. So someday these sensors will be so sensitive that you will be able to measure a few cancer cells. And so these cells, your body always has some cancer cells, but now you measure them and we figure out a way to zap them, and you never have cancer. So you tell me, why would anybody resist knowing about these things when you know that you could solve them?
That's
People,
also true.
yeah, people may not live any longer, but they will live much more healthful lives.
So if I get you right, it's nowadays the system is like you are sick and you're already sick and you are trying to find a cure for your sickness, and sometimes it works, and other times if you're unhappy it doesn't. So, for example, cancer you mentioned it, or heart failures. So, for example, let's assume a 90 years old man is otherwise healthy, but he has cancer or a heart problem. And if he knew that before that those things are developing, he would become 100 years. Well, the thing, of course, is it would also cause other social problems. Like nowadays, in many countries, like in my own, that there are too many old people to pay the pension when people are out of their jobs, those younger people. So the balance is not there anymore. So I think it will be an advantage, but also create new problems about the health system, about the balance of the pension system, and so on.
Well, you are making a very bad assumption. You're assuming that we old people cannot be productive. Shame on you. You're
No, 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 no.
because the old people are productive. They can also make contributions to the wealth. So yes, you are. The one thing you are 100% right is we have to have a new balance.
Yeah,
But first of all, keep in mind now, while we are making old people more healthful, the young people are getting more and more productive because of the improvements in collaboration. So we have a more productive young people. We have old people that are no longer a burden on the health system. Did you know that something like 80% of our health care is spent on older people?
that's
So
true.
if we stop the disease, we will save a huge amount of money just in that way alone. So, yes, you're right. There's going to be a complete rebalancing of everything. But believe me, we are not going to have a problem with the young people taking care of the old people.
I see. I see. Yes. Well, so you say people are living longer, but they're also living healthier. This means the whole society is not having so much health problems. So things are more balanced this way already.
Yeah, you're exactly right. If you think about it, in the U.S., we are now spending for every dollar that we create in productivity, we are spending 20 cents of that just on healthcare alone. And that number keeps increasing. And if we don't stop it within 10 years, it will be up to 30%, 30 cents out of every dollar. Well, that's not sustainable. We need some kind of solution to stop that and stop spending so much money curing disease. And of course, as you said a few minutes ago, the answer is not cure disease, but prevent it in the first place. Stop it from ever happening.
I see. But this also means on the counter side that we would be even more depending on technology.
Yes, that is most certainly true. You think that's a bad thing?
Well, it depends. I mean, for example, I'm a geek. I love technology. I mean, I'm working in that field. I'm an IT guy. I perfectly love it. But I see it from my father, for example. Um, he is very well, very, how you say it, biased about it. I don't know. People are sometimes not so open when it comes to changes. Even if it would improve their lives, they are always thinking about what is the bad side of it. I mean, for example, think about the old discussion like, does radio frequency from the mobile phone, does it generate health issues? Does it support cancer or brain damages? It's something that nobody found an answer for, but people are very, very scared about the negative side effects those improvements would have, like for the mobile phone nowadays.
No, you are most certainly true. And the one thing that I must tell you is when I make these predictions about the end of disease, about the end of poverty, about a new class of people who are much smarter because they've been educated better. These things are not going to happen very quickly because human beings, as you correctly say, are very conservative. They don't like big changes. So this is going to take a few generations. And I'm afraid that your father will never avail himself of these new things because they will not happen until perhaps you are a very old man. But the one thing that we cannot do is move backwards. People today live longer, they live more healthfully, they are wealthier than people were 100 years ago. You know that's true, right?
Yeah, of course.
How did that happen?
Yeah.
It happened because of technology. So the one thing that the world will never do is go backwards. They, they, yes, we get addicted to technology, but the advantages of this new technology are so great that we can't go backwards.
I mean, it's also a matter of changing point of view. I recognize that when I see movies from the 80s, and there are mentioned like, oh, this 70 years old man, this is very old. But nowadays you say 70? 70 is not old. Why is 70 old? Maybe 90 is old or something. So this whole point of view is changing. So I think, um, as a parallel example, even for that improvement for the as I say, healthcare and preventing diseases, also the attitude of the society has to change more towards the positive. I mean,
Yeah.
that's probably one of those things that are very important.
Well, you are most certainly true. Everything that you say is exactly right, and especially the part about 90-year-old, because you know that I'm 86 years old,
Yes.
and, and I do not feel old, at least most of the time.
Well, yes. I mean, I saw plenty of your interviews, and you look very fit and very active. Um, so yes, I guess people would not guess that you are already 86 years old. And I, as you probably saw or know, I do a lot of those interviews with pioneers and inventors, and well, many of them are in their 80s or almost 80 or in their 90s, like Ralph Baer that I interviewed, who was 91 at that time I interviewed him. Um, so I'm very happy to see that people like you and like him and like other people, they never stop improving and working on their inventions. So I saw you, even you are still active in the mobile world nowadays.
Yeah, well, you know what it is. It's your both your mind and your body. If you continue to exercise them, will retain much of their ability. So I hope that I can still think. I can't do engineering like I used to, like you do now, but I have enough experience so there are other places where I can make contributions. And I have to work much harder now to stay physically fit, but it's worth it. If I could, you know, like every 3 times a week, I go to a cliff near my home, right on the Pacific Ocean, and I run up and down stairs. Well, people think I'm crazy, but you have to do that to keep your body fit. Same thing with your mind. If you keep thinking and you keep exercising your mind, you can still do pretty well.
Um, yeah, well, I asked Yash Terakura about it, who was the engineer of Commodore Japan, why he is still working at pension. He is 66 right now. Why are you still working on inventing new things? And he said, because I'm an inventor and I'm a pioneer, and I see what other people do nowadays, and I know I can do it better. This is why I keep improving things, and why I'm still keeping my mind busy with how to improve the world.
Yep. if you think about it, why would anybody stop? You know, the concept of retirement is designed around people who are doing things that they do not enjoy doing. I think that's a terrible shame. I think that everybody has an entitlement to do things that they are passionate about. You know, when I look at you, what do I see? I see passion. You
Thank you.
really enjoy doing this. You've got this big smile on your face right now. You are having a good time.
Yeah.
Well, tell me why you should ever retire from that. Of course not.
Yeah, but it's just a hobby anyway. Yeah, but anyway, I love my job, and I'm very happy that I'm able to combine the hobby and my job and doing this interview right now because I have also worked in the telecommunication field for a VoIP internet provider, so I know a bit about the backgrounds about what you invented. So for me, it's a pleasure. I can combine the hobby and what I do for a living, and use both skills to talk to you and get hopefully the right questions to you, so to get an interesting interview out of it. Um, yes. Well, so let's talk about this. Um, you are also connected to other people, and you also received awards for your invention, because shortly before Ralph Baer died, unfortunately last year on St. Nicholas Day, he sent me an email and he asked you to mention something to you during the interview. I hope this is okay for you.
Sure.
He wrote, "Hello Jörg. When you see Marty Cooper, remind him that we met in Boozman, Montana in 2002 along with several other inventors by invitation of George Preventative's American Computer Museum for the Stiglitz Award. Tell him that my paths crossed with Larry Hood, also a Stiglitz 2002 awardee, last month when I received this Edison Medal for the YEEE, and he got an award too. The YEEE was in Amsterdam, and my son Mark represented me there. All the best, Ralph."
Yes, of course. And I do remember meeting him in actually it was in Wyoming in the north of the U.S. So I remember that very, very, very well.
So tell us a bit, how does this feel for you that you receive awards for your, well, how to say, lifetime invention, for your lifetime achievement?
Well, you know, whenever I receive the world has been very good to me. I've got a number of awards. I always tell people that I didn't do any of these things by myself. In every case, if I was surrounded by brilliant people who made these things happen. So having an idea is very easy. Having the idea actually happen and be completed is a necessary thing, and it only happens if you have other people involved. So it is the teams that are really important, and I always make that clear. I accept these awards on behalf of all of the people that have made these things a reality.
Yes, that's interesting, because in the many interviews, very little talk about what did you do before inventing the mobile phone. What was your actual position at Motorola, and what did you do before having the idea of Motorola? Because you were telling at the start of the interview you worked for Motorola for many years. You said
29 years.
29 years.
Well, you know, you made this comment about this Japanese fellow. Inventors are basically very critical people. So I still remember my first years at Motorola. I encountered a piece of equipment that they called a digital selector. And actually, what a digital selector, you would laugh because being a techie, and this is a mechanical device. It went click, 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 and it allowed, all it did was ring a bell in a particular two-way radio and not in others on the same radio channel. And I looked at that and I said, we have a device called a transistor, and I think I can build that thing using only transistors. So I've been criticizing the way people do things my whole career and trying to figure out how to do them more efficiently. And that's what inventors do. They try to make a more efficient world. And so we're back again. We've just done a full circle to solving the poverty problem, right?
I see.
Making things more efficient, you make the world a better place to live in. And I did that in my whole career at Motorola. I actually ended up producing that digital selector. I was involved in the first nationwide car telephone system. That was in 1962. I helped start the radio paging industry. That was in 1970. I built the first rural radio telephones. So we actually put radios in farms, so using a push-button telephone when the rest of the world was still using rotary dial phones.
Seriously? Wow.
I was lucky enough to be in the communications world when all of these things were changing, and I could make a contribution. So if there's anything that I could say, Joerg, is I'm a very lucky fellow. I was born at the right time, and I happened to come in with a good company. I happened to go to a wonderful university, the Illinois Institute of Technology. So I have been very, very fortunate.
So, speaking about inventions, what are your thoughts about other people inventing things? I mean, we mentioned Ralph Baer, and I know that even nowadays, a lot of people say that video games, especially at home, are a waste of time. While, for example, I use it to socialize with friends on the weekends and have some fun together. But when you talk to inventors like you or Ralph Baer or other people, um, you often hear the phrase that people say this will never be a success. So, what's your opinion about this? I mean, did you ever think like video games are a waste of time, or I don't know, or smartphones shouldn't have been invented? What's your point of view about what other people invent?
Well, it's a very complicated subject. We could spend a whole hour on this thing. Let me describe it in my way.
Sure.
Uh, we had a game many years ago called Pong. You remember Pong?
Yes, of course.
You had just two paddles, and you had a control in your hand, and the ball just bounced there and back. It's the most stupid game you could imagine, and yet people spent hours doing that. Now, why was the advantage of that? This is the first time that people interacted with the screen. And pretty soon they got bored with this. So we went to the next stage, Pac-Man. You remember Pac-Man?
Yes,
Now
of
it's
course.
complicated, and you have to do more thinking. And then you go beyond that to other games, and the next thing you know, people are very comfortable using a mouse to control a computer. Now, you know that computers are not a waste of time, but it took time to get people comfortable with this. And I believe the same thing is true of all these complicated games. I told you before, I think these games are going to evolve into a future education system, and that what's going to happen with the children who are educated with these new games, it's been demonstrated that when you are challenged continuously, playing a game or being educated, that your brain actually grows in power. So we will have a situation now where our children who have gone through all these games, are going to be smarter than we are. And of
Yes,
course,
that's
satisfaction we will have is that their children are going to be smarter than them. So we are really talking about in a few generations a new class of society, and maybe this new class, these new smarter people will be smart enough not to have wars and smart enough to have solved all these big problems that I talk about.
yeah, but then there are a lot of other people. I mean, I don't want to sound negative again. I just want to get the counter side. A lot of other people say that also technology makes people more dumb because nowadays you don't have to read books or go to the library. You have the internet. And you just can Google and look up in Wikipedia what you want to know without controlling if the info is correct.
Yep. Well, you must know I don't agree with these people who say that. Uh, think about it in the way of you're saying at one time you had to be able to calculate things in your mind. Now the computer does all those things. Well, of course. Why should you waste your brain, which has this incredible capability of abstracting, of creating? Computers can't do that, but computers can do the calculation. They can do the simple things much better than we can. So why waste the mental energy ever to even learn how to do that? So uh, I, uh, I think we are back to the situation about is technology good or bad? Well, it has some bad aspects, and we have not yet learned how to accommodate all these new technologies. We're still in early days, but someday we will create. I'm back to all these wise things that you said. You need the right balance, right? Didn't you say that before?
Yes,
And
I
I
said.
think that the humanity is going to learn how to balance these things. We are going to learn what things we should turn over to the computers and what things that are important for human beings. Whether we read on paper or on a screen is not so important. But the fact that we continue to learn and that we continue to expand the capabilities of the human brain, now that's a desirable thing. And I think that computers and these other machines do that. They expand the capability of the human brain.
So you would say the focus is shifting to other things. That I see. So we are focusing on other things, while in past we were more focusing on the simple things that are not needed anymore, like doing math or calculations in our brain, as used as an example. Now we use a calculator.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, I don't like that example because I think it's still very useful to be able to do some quick calculations, right? I'm sure you do that yourself. That when you need to calculate an important problem, you have an idea of what the answer is.
Of
But
course.
there again, it's a balance. And yes, some of these time-consuming things that we used to waste our energies on, let the computer do that. Someday we are going to be connected to these computers through our minds, and just think of the power that what does the human brain do? It abstracts very well. It does these creative processes well, but it's terrible at remembering. It's terrible at computing. So if you are connected to a computer efficiently, not through a keyboard, not through some touch something, but actually directly connected from your mind, you now have a much more powerful mind that has extraordinary memory that can compute things, but also can abstract things very well and create things. And that combination is actually a new form of humanity. Now, that's going to take many generations to happen, but I hope that this new form of humanity will run the world better than we are doing today.
But isn't there a risk that in some way the computers could take over, like you see in many science fiction movies nowadays? that people get too much, well, depending on the technology, that technology is firing back, especially when you say the technology is connected to your brain. This sounds really, really weird in a way.
Well, I try to express it that way, that this is a new form of humanity. It is partly human, partly machine. But isn't that what you are today? I'm looking at you right now. You are partly human, partly machine. I see that thing around your head. And I see a machine behind you. So I'm just talking about degree. And yes, it's not inconceivable that someday you will not be able to separate the computer and the machine. They are going to meld into one, and I think that's inevitable. And I can only hope that this is a much more efficient combination than we have today, and that it's a more productive world.
I see. So you see it more positive, and you think technology would help people to involve in getting healthier and happier and better access to new technologies.
Well, I don't know how you figured that out, Jürgen, but I am a positive person and I am an optimist. There is also the possibility, that we will blow ourselves up in the next few years. None of these things will happen, but I am optimistic and I don't think that's going to happen.
That's very good. Yeah, well, I also know you like to try out new things. Um, you also spoke a bit about home automation in the Triangle show. So you actually have a lot of technology around you all day in your home and in your life, I guess. Not only the mobile phone.
Well, that's right. I can raise and lower the window shades in this room that we are in now by just pushing a button. And in fact, I have a computer that does that. My computer knows that what time the sunset is and what time the sun comes to shine in this room. So it lowers the shades at 3 hours before sunset, whenever sunset is. And then 1 minute before sunset, the shades go up so that I can watch the sunset. So I didn't do these things because I want to be a home automation expert, but I really like to understand how things work. Now I'm looking for somebody who can take over this job for me because it's gotten out of hand. I could spend my whole life doing home automation, and that's not my life.
Yes,
So if
yes.
you have some free time, you can come over and help me fix these things.
Well, well, I'm just happy that I figured out how to operate my computer from at home from on the go at work and so on. So that's totally fine for me. Um, yeah, well, so the thing is, another important thing is how what's your concept of getting, well, seniors being less afraid of new technology that aren't inventors and pioneers like yourself. I mean, you have it very easy. You invented the mobile phone. You know how things work. But a lot of 60 plus people nowadays, they are afraid of smartphones and so on.
They are only afraid of these things because these phones are not designed properly.
Oh, okay.
Let me define good technology. Good technology is intuitive, right? You don't have to look at a manual, you just know how to do it. Better technology is transparent. It's there and you can manipulate it, but it doesn't get in the way. The best technology, the best technology is invisible. It's there, it serves you, it's your servant, but you don't even know that it is present. So anytime that you say that somebody like your father, you gave it as an example, has trouble using technology, it's because it's bad technology. If the technology is done properly, the people just do go through life do what they do, but everything is smoother, everything is more efficient, because the machines are there doing the things that they do best, and the humans do what they do best. So we're back again on a circle about why I don't use cell phones now. If you look at the instruction manual for a modern cell phone, it's bigger than the cell phone. That's bad technology. The ideal cell phone would know who you are, adapt itself to you, act as your servant, solve your problems, and have no complications that make your life worse.
I see. I see. So that's your point of view about that. Well, so this means that what you have in mind can't be achieved with the technology nowadays because we are not far enough at voice recognition, for example, or face recognition.
Well, we're working on all these things. I told you it will take generations to do this, but the engineers have to keep remembering this one thing about technology for the sake of technology is bad. The only useful thing about technology is how it makes people's lives better. I think we engineers sometimes forget that. We get caught up in the excitement of gimmicks,
Uh,
technology for the sake of technology, and that's a danger. People are a fundamental part of what technology is.
so gadgets like nowadays the smartwatches that are going to be a hype, or all are already a hype nowadays.
Oh, of course they're a hype here. Can you,
No, not yet. Oh
there you,
yes, now I see it.
yeah, that's a Motorola 360. I'm still trying to figure out how this works, and since you mentioned that, I have here this is a Nike fitness watch. I've got the latest Microsoft, and I have no idea how to work this Microsoft thing. I'm just learning how to use the Motorola watch, but I'm really having trouble. So we're in the Pong stage of watches. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, of course,
We are,
definitely.
and we have to go through that stage. How else could we find out what people will adapt to? But uh, we are really at very early stages about the wearables. We are in the technology for the sake of technology stage, and we have to get to the people stage.
Great. Well, I see you are prepared for everything. You have an opinion about everything. This is very good. So, despite you think that technology is not advanced enough and not simple enough for people, you still think this is a good idea. I mean, for example, you have to see the positive sides of it. For example, nowadays we can do video calls over the internet thanks to a software called Skype, which was not imaginable like 20 years ago or 25 years ago, or even before that, where well, telephones with a monitor was so expensive and needed so much traffic, it was, well, not worth even buying it.
Yeah.
So don't you think that it's not only the technology has to be easier, but also people getting more used and more open on using those technologies? I mean, I think in 30 years everybody will know how to use a computer or how to use a smartphone.
Well, uh, we've had such a good meeting up till now. We should have some differences of opinion, and only the way we express it. If you're telling me that people are going to change to adapt to the machines, that's wrong.
Okay.
I think the machines have to adapt to the people, and of course, people are going to change their habits, but they will not be learning how to use the machines. They will be somehow interacting better with the machines.
Oh, okay.
There's a subtle difference to this. I mean, it makes sense to you. Or the learning how to use a keyboard, for example. That's terrible. Why should anybody have to learn how to do that? But the machines of the future will be looking at you and interpreting your expressions and interpreting your hand motions and listening to your speech and reacting to the speech. And of course, sometime in the future, maybe your children will know about this, they will be reading your mind. But will not be changing yourself to try to learn tools. That's what I meant by the technology being invisible. It's there to help you, but you only adapt to it in ways that are natural and that are productive. You don't do unproductive things like learning how to type.
So what's an example of a technology that is involved enough, helping us, and already invisible?
Oh, let me think. Well, I have to take some really simple examples, but the thermostat in my house, it just sits there. I walk in my house. My house is always at the same temperature, all year round. It's always around. I don't know what it is in Celsius, but it's around 72 degrees. And I never even look at the thermostat. It's just there. That's invisible technology. And then you have the new thermostat. They have this Nest that will adapt to your habits.
Oh yes, I have read about that.
In the house and when you're not in the house, so it will, when you leave the house, it will lower the temperature. Now that is really, that's invisible technology. It's there, it's doing things, but you don't ever see it. An example of really excellent technology is the gear shift on your car. I don't know how you call that in German. What do you
Gangschaltung,
yeah, the automatic transmission.
automatic transmission.
Yeah, you think about that. The automatic transmission in a modern car is a marvel of technology. It's electronic, hydraulic, electrical, mechanical, and amazing technology. Do you ever think about that? You get in the car and you just move the lever. You never look at the instruction manual. It does what you want, right? That's good technology. It's not invisible yet, but someday it will be.
I thought of a pacemaker, I guess. That would be another example, no?
Sure, sure. You once you put that in the pacemaker, and there are other things. They have insulin pumps now that they will implant, and the insulin pump measures your blood sugar, and when you need insulin, it will pump it in, and you don't think about it. It's just there. Same thing with the pacemaker. It keeps you alive, but those are good.
I mean, it's interesting. Um, I read about cases where people got their pacemakers in the 70s, and now they are almost 100 years. So this shows that the technology is good enough to not shorten the lifespan of a person, which is right now the problem for artificial hearts, for example. They only work for 1 year or two, and then they have to replace by real hearts.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they'll solve that problem someday too, I suppose. That that's not my expertise. I'm not in the heart business.
Yes, but you mentioned the medical improvements. I guess that's part of it, right?
Yeah, you bet.
So you said you're not stopping to think about things, how to improve things. So what are your plans for the future?
Well, one thing I'm doing, I'm trying to write a book to talk about my life and how some of these more details about these things that you and I have been talking about. I'm also on a few government committees. I'm trying to get the governments to understand that spectrum is a key to this future that we talked about, where people are all interconnected and working together and having their bodily information transmitted and being educated. All of this is going to require a huge amount of transmitted data. And if we don't improve how we use the radio channels, then we will not be able to do these things. And I'm trying to persuade our government that we need to continue to improve the technology of spectrum efficiency. I have been working on this for many, many years and understand that our ability to use the spectrum more efficient has been improving. It's been actually doubling. The throughput has been doubling every 2.5 years for over 110 years. You know how much that is? That's 10 trillion times improvement since Marconi. So, and I'm trying to persuade our elected officials that we can keep doing this for another 100 years. And it's necessary to do that if we are going to do all of these important wireless things. So I'm on a few government committees, and I talk a lot, and I give a lot of speeches, and I do interviews like you and I are doing.
Yes. Well, I mean, you were mentioning a lot about improving and getting things ahead. What I figured out personally is that in the last 2 or 3 years, the mobile technology took took place and improved a lot in the poor or not so rich western parts of Africa. Suddenly, I have a lot of friends from Burundi or other countries from Africa um, who actually use 3G mobile network for doing Skype video calls with me. And the quality is as good as the connection we have right now. And I guess you're not using a mobile phone connection for this Skype call.
That's right.
So, did you ever think that your mobile phone technology would actually be used for internet and video transmission and getting things more global?
Well, you could bet, Joerg, that I did not think of that in 1973, because in 1973 there was no internet. There was also no digital camera. There was also no personal computer in 1973. So you're right, I never thought about any of those things. But I did know how much personal communications could improve productivity. Just voice and texting, which is what most of the people do with the handies nowadays. Those alone improve productivity enormously. And that is something that I learned at Motorola many, many years ago.
I see you like the German phrase. You don't like so much the cellular phone or mobile phone phrase.
Well, I try to adapt, but they call it something different in every country, and whatever you call it, you and I know what it is.
Of course. Yes, well, you were mentioning um, working on the regulations and FCC and so on, but what's also interesting is you have a good help from your wife, Arlene Harris, who's also working in that field.
Yeah, my wife is much smarter than I am. She is brilliant. She actually never finished college, and you would be amazed at what she knows about the technology of the internet, of communications, but also about people. She is the ultimate inventor. She thinks everything could be improved. The only bad part is she's always complaining about everything, which she's not an optimist like I am. But my wife is an inventor. She invented the jitterbug phone, which you don't have in Europe. But it is a phone specifically designed for seniors and for people who want simplicity. And turns out this principle that I told you about, making things simple, is not as easy as you think. It's actually harder to make things simple than to make them complicated. So, and my wife is much younger than I am. She is still making contributions, and wonderful. You are a superb interviewer. You did extremely well. And about the only way that I know that you are German is you have a slight accent, not very much, but we certainly did not need translation software, which someday I'm going to try out. It'd be interesting to see how that works. But in your case, we don't need that. And your questions were superb.
Actually, Microsoft released earlier this. Well, actually, in January they released a beta version for Windows 8 Skype that actually allows real-time translation. So I'm talking in German, and they would translate it to you in English, but it's not very efficient. It still makes a lot of errors and
Yeah.
problems.
You have tried that out?
No, 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 I didn't. I really don't like the new way Windows 8 works with apps and so on. I prefer the desktop version. I have my desktop, I prefer that. I don't think my PC is a smartphone, if you understand the parallel about this. I don't like those boxes on the screen. Even though I have a touch screen on my PC, I never use it. So
Yeah.
I think I wouldn't.
I'm getting used to it now, and I like it. I can move you around right now. You can't see it happening, but
So
I'm little by little I'm becoming accustomed to the touch screen, and I think it's a sign of the future.
So you see, you are even more adjustable than myself to new technology in a way.
I don't know. I think when you get adapted to the modern world, you will be much better than I am.
Yes, well, great. So I have to admit this were all my questions that I had. Thanks for answering them all.
So, if I want to find out how effective you are, I should mention that my Twitter handle is at Marty Mobile,
Sure.
MARTY Mobile. And if I don't have 1,000 more followers after you publish this, I'll be very disappointed, you. Bye
Oh
bye.
yeah, thank you. Bye.